When a disaster hits, most people assume help is coming. And maybe it is, but there's a dangerous mistake hidden in that assumption. Help being approved does not mean help is at your house. Help being announced does not mean your power is coming back on tonight. And FEMA responding to a disaster does not mean your family automatically has food, water, heat, medicine, fuel, or a way to cook. That waiting period is where people get caught off guard. Because whether the problem is funding, staffing, paperwork, road closures, supply shortages, or just the sheer size of the disaster, the result for your family is the same. You're waiting. So the question is, what are you going to do? Wait around and just hope the government gets to you in time? Or are you going to make sure you have enough in place to help yourself until outside help actually arrives? Hey, it's Jara with Wicked Prepared. I want to be really clear right from the beginning. This is definitely not a video about hating on FEMA or hating on the government. It's not a video where I'm saying that the government never helps. That's not what I believe. And honestly, I don't think that's a fair thing to say. There are good people who work in emergency management. And even though our system is flawed, it is far better than what many other countries have. But I do think we have to be honest about something. Government response, like FEMA and state-level emergency management agencies, may be part of the recovery, but relying on the government should not be your family's only emergency plan. In this video, I want to talk about a few examples where help came, but it was far slower, far messier, and far more complicated than people would have expected, including one right here in Maine where we live that people still talk about decades later. But more importantly, I want to show you how to think through a simple 7-day disaster gap plan so your family is not sitting there helplessly waiting on a system that may already be overwhelmed. And stay with me because near the end, I'm going to give you a simple question that you can ask yourself that's going to tell you exactly where you need to focus. You may have seen in the news that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, has been under serious funding pressure again. Recently, FEMA had to move into something called immediate needs funding because the disaster relief fund was running low. Basically, when that happens, they have to prioritize the most urgent life-saving needs and slow down or delay other types of disaster spending. Now, depending on when you're watching this, that situation may have changed. Congress may add funding, restrictions may lift, new restrictions could come back later. But honestly, that proves the point. It is a tough pill to swallow, but interestingly enough, FEMA does not have unlimited money. They don't have unlimited staff, and they don't have unlimited supplies to help us. And when a disaster is widespread, they have to prioritize. That might make sense from a national disaster response standpoint, but at your kitchen table, it still means one thing. You need to be able to get through that gap. The time between when the emergency starts and when outside help actually reaches you in a useful way. Sometimes it's a few hours, sometimes it's a day, but in larger disasters or widespread disasters, it can be several days, a week, or even longer. And that's where preparedness matters. Not because help never comes, not because we're trying to live in fear, but because even when help is coming, you still have to get through that waiting period. If you've ever been through a power outage, you know what I mean. At first, it's almost kind of interesting, maybe a little bit fun. The lights go out, everyone grabs the flashlights, maybe you light a candle, toss the electronics aside, you look outside and think, okay, hopefully this isn't going to last too long. But after a while, the novelty turns to worry. The house gets colder or hotter, depending on where you live and what time of the year it is. The fridge starts warming up. The freezer becomes a concern. Your phone battery is dropping. And if you're on a well, you may not have running water. If the roads are bad, you may not be able to just run to the store. And if the power's out in town also, the gas station may not be pumping gas or the card readers may not be working. And suddenly, you're not dealing with one problem. You're dealing with 5 or 6 problems at the same time. That's the part people don't always picture. They picture the storm. They picture the headline. They picture the news coverage, but they don't picture day 3 in their dark house trying to figure out what to feed everybody, how to get drinking water, how to check on their family, and how long they can keep waiting before things become a real problem. Most people remember Hurricane Katrina. It became one of the most criticized disaster responses in modern American history. People were stranded, communication broke down, coordination failed. And later, a congressional report on the response was titled A Failure of Initiative. That report pointed to serious problems with planning, communication, logistics, coordination, shelter plans, and an overwhelmed FEMA logistics and contracting system. And that phrase, an overwhelmed system, is the part that matters for us. I don't want to oversimplify Katrina because it was very complicated. There were failures at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. There were evacuation problems, communication problems, shelter problems, supply problems, and command problems. But this is exactly why it matters, because disasters are complicated. And when everything has to work under pressure, it doesn't always work like it should. When you're sitting in your house with no power or standing in a shelter or trying to figure out where your next meal is coming from, you're not thinking about which agency is responsible for which part of the response. You're just waiting for information, waiting for food, waiting for water, waiting for someone to tell you what to do next. And Katrina isn't the only example. After Hurricane Andrew in 1992, FEMA was criticized for being slow and not understanding the scale of the damage fast enough. After Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico in 2017, there were reports about staffing shortages, a lack of trained personnel, and recovery problems that dragged on for years. After Hurricane Harvey, also in 2017, watchdogs found problems with housing assistance and waste. And it's not just hurricanes. After the Camp Fire destroyed Paradise, California in 2018, survivors weren't just waiting for the fires to be out. They were waiting for housing, paperwork assistance, and some kind of path back to normal life. The fire was over, the headlines moved on, but families were still trying to figure out where they were going to sleep. Over 50,000 people were displaced, and the government response was less than stellar. Time and time again, we've seen the same basic lesson. Large systems can be overwhelmed, and when they are, your family still needs to survive. I couldn't make a video like this without talking about Hurricane Helene because it is one of the most recent disasters that showed us this in a really frightening way. A lot of people hear the word hurricane and think, well, I don't live on the coast, so that's not really going to be a problem for me. But Helene proved that you don't have to live on the coast to be caught in a hurricane disaster. By the time it moved into East Tennessee and the southern Appalachians, this was not about storm surge at the beach. This was mountain flooding. Rivers rose fast, roads washed out, bridges were damaged, communities were completely cut off, and people realized very quickly that help was not as simple as making a phone call. Helene hit Tennessee and North Carolina in late September of 2024. FEMA did respond, and disaster declarations were approved in October, but in January, people were still homeless and freezing. All the way through May and June, housing was still a serious problem for many families, and that's what I want people to understand. A disaster declaration does not magically get your bridge back in place. It doesn't reopen the road to your house. It doesn't instantly get your prescription refilled.
FEMA has not helped us.
Time and time again,
we didn't hear from anybody.
We have heard the same message from Western North Carolina residents.
I'd like to see more military crews, bigger equipment.
And volunteers.
There's no government out here. FEMA has abandoned the people out here, basically. Most of the roads that you see built out were built out by volunteers.
Nearly 200 roads are also still closed. And seeing the response so far, survivors say they're not feeling optimistic.
When we were talking about doing this video, Mr. Wicked Prepared was remembering back to the ice storm that hit Maine and much of New England. I was actually going to school in California at the time, so I wasn't here, but he remembers it very clearly. That storm is a good example, not because it was some huge FEMA scandal. FEMA did, in fact, respond. Crews were working, help was coming, but families still had to get through it on their own. Mr. Wicked Prepared went several weeks without electricity and running water in the middle of winter in Maine. Roads were a mess, communication was difficult. People were trying to stay warm, keep their pipes from freezing, take care of their family, and figure out how to manage day-to-day life when nothing was normal. He had no way of knowing if many of his family members were okay. He had no way to watch the news or get updates on when or if help would be coming. He recalls hearing the crews off in the distance, the only glimmer of hope that some sense of normalcy would return sometime soon, but it would be a total of 27 days before electricity was restored to his home. He actually did a video about it back in 2022. I'm going to put a link to that in the description if you're interested in watching it. But the point here is, even with the ice storm of 98, yes, there was a disaster declaration and FEMA became involved, but nobody was magically showing up at every house on the first night with groceries, fuel, bottled water, a generator, and a hot meal. Families still had to live through that gap. And the reality is, some didn't make it. That is the part we need to take seriously, because when people hear the government will help, they sometimes skip over the hard part. They skip over the waiting, the paperwork, the road closures, the supply shortages, and the fact that everyone else around them needs help too. When everyone needs help at the same time, the system gets stretched. Even if people are trying their best, there are only so many crews, so many trucks, so many supplies, and so many hours in the day, and only so much money to go around. That's not fear mongering, it's just reality. So the question is not really, will the government help? The better question is, what does my family do until help actually reaches us? Your family still needs water, food, heat or cooling, medicine, a way to cook, a way to charge phones, a way to get through the night. And nobody cares more about that than you do. That might sound heavy, but I actually think it's empowering because it means there are things that we can do right now. We don't have to sit around and just hope that every system works perfectly. We can look honestly at the most likely problems and make our homes a little more stable. Picture this. It is day 3. The power still isn't back. Your phone is at 13%. The fridge is warm and you're trying not to open the freezer. Your kids are hungry. Your house is cold. You're hearing that crews are working as fast as they can, but nobody can give you a real answer. That is not the moment that you want to be figuring out your plan. That's the moment that you want to be using the plan you already made. And I really do mean a simple plan. This is where people get overwhelmed with their preparedness. They picture a bunker, a year's worth of food, a giant generator, shelves full of gear, and they think, well, I can't do all of that, so why bother? But that's not how real preparedness works for most families. Real preparedness starts by looking around your house and asking one simple question. If something out of the normal happened tonight, what would become a problem first? Would it be water, staying warm or staying cool, food, cooking, charging our phones, medication, pets, the kids? Whatever answer comes to your mind first, that's where you need to start. And that's why I like the idea of a 7-day disaster gap plan. Not because 7 days is some magic number, but because a week gives you breathing room. If the power's out for 2 days, you're okay. If the roads are bad for 3 days, you're all right. If the stores are picked over for a few days, you're not immediately desperate. If help takes longer than expected, you still have options. And options are really what preparedness gives you. Start with water, because once the water is unsafe or unavailable, your whole outlook changes. It's drinking water, yes, but it's also cooking, washing hands, taking your medicine. Your pets need water, keeping your house feeling somewhat functional. At a minimum, you're going to want 7 gallons per person to last 1 week. So store water. Have a filter if that makes sense for your situation, and think through what you would do if the tap water stopped or if you were told that you had to boil it. Then think about food, but don't just store random food. A shelf full of cans might look like preparedness, but if it doesn't turn into actual meals that your family will eat, it may not help as much as you think. Think breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, hot drinks, comfort foods, and simple meals that don't require a normal kitchen. Soup, oatmeal, canned meat, pasta and sauce, rice and beans, peanut butter, shelf-stable milk, freeze-dried ingredients, pancake mix, whatever your family already eats and knows how to use. This is why I care so much about building a pantry with real foods and real meals. In an emergency, you're already dealing with enough. Dinner doesn't need to feel like a punishment. I actually did a video about this pretty recently where I talked about having a 14-day menu plan, and I had a free printable worksheet to go along with that video. So after this video, be sure to take a look at that for some more ideas. Next up, think about cooking, because having food and being able to prepare food are not the same thing. If the power's out, can you heat that soup? Can you boil that water? Can you make oatmeal? Can you make coffee? Do you have a camp stove, propane, a grill, matches, lighters? Do you know where all those things are? And please think through this safely. Don't use grills, camp stoves, or generators inside. Carbon monoxide is serious, and every time there's a major power outage, people get hurt because they were trying to stay warm or cook a meal and they didn't realize how dangerous it really was. So don't just have a cooking method, have a safe cooking method and enough fuel to get you through at least 7 days. Then think about heat or cooling. This is going to depend on where you live. For us here in Maine, heat is the bigger issue. If the power goes out in the winter, do you have extra blankets, sleeping bags, warm layers, wool socks, a safe heat source, or a way to close off one room and keep everyone all together? And if you live somewhere hot, your concern might just be the opposite. How do you stay cool? How do you keep someone safe who's elderly or medically fragile or heat sensitive? Where would you go if your home became unsafe? Preparedness is not one size fits all. It has to match your life. You also need the basics that keep a bad situation from becoming worse. Flashlights that work, extra batteries, headlamps, power banks, a battery radio, prescriptions, pain reliever, fever reducer, allergy medicine, bandages, pet food, trash bags, paper plates, toilet paper and wipes, hand sanitizer. You need some cash, paper copies of your important phone numbers and insurance information and other documents. If you're new to this concept, just know that you're not going to build the perfect emergency plan in a weekend. This is something that takes time. But if you haven't started, now is the time to get started. The easiest thing, start with your weakest spot. Every family has one. Maybe it's water because you're on a well. Maybe it's heat because everything in your house is electric. Maybe it's food because your pantry is pretty thin right now. Maybe it's medicine. Maybe it's your pets. Maybe it's having a baby in the house. Maybe an older parent who lives nearby. Maybe it's just that you live really far from town. Whatever that weak spot is, start there. That's how real preparedness works. Not copying someone else's pantry, not trying to prepare for every possible thing that could ever happen. Just looking honestly at your own home and saying, where are we most vulnerable and what can I do about that this week? One case of water, one extra shelf-stable meal, one working flashlight, one printed phone list, one backup battery, one bag of pet food, one step that makes your family less fragile than they were yesterday. That may not sound like it would make a difference, but that is the kind of preparedness that actually changes things. Because when something happens, you don't transform into some imaginary version of yourself. You fall back on what you already have in place. If you have water, food, a way to cook, light, heat, medicine, cash, and a way to communicate, you have options. And when everyone else is scrambling, options are everything. You can stay home instead of running out to the store. You can make dinner instead of panicking. You can keep your kids calmer because you're calmer. You can check on someone else because your own house is not immediately in crisis. And that brings me to another point that I'd like to make. Preparedness is not selfish. When you prepare, you actually reduce pressure on the system. If you don't need emergency water on day 2, that water can go to someone who had no way to prepare. If you don't need food immediately, that food can go to someone who lost everything. If your house is stable, maybe you can help a neighbor, make a phone call, share a meal, or check on someone who's scared. That is not selfish. That is responsible. And honestly, that is the kind of preparedness that I believe in. Not panic, not drama, not sitting around waiting for bad things to happen. Just quiet, steady, practical preparedness that gives your family more stability when something goes wrong. Storms happen, floods happen, fires happen, power outages happen, supply chains get strained, government systems get overwhelmed, budgets run low, paperwork gets delayed, and sometimes help comes later than people expected. So no, this is not about saying FEMA never helps. It's about being honest that FEMA can't be everywhere for everyone immediately. And your family still has to get through that gap. So here's what I want you to do today. Don't make it complicated. Don't try to solve everything. Just look around your house and ask yourself one question. If the power went out tonight and stayed out for a week, what would become a problem first? Whatever your answer is, that's your next step. And I'd really love to hear from you on this one. Have you ever been through a disaster, a long power outage, a hurricane, a flood, a wildfire, an ice storm, anything where help came later than people expected? If you were in the ice storm of 1998, especially if you were here in Maine, we would love to hear what you remember. What worked? What didn't? What do you wish that you'd done differently? Leave that in the comments because these real stories help people. Sometimes people don't wake up because someone tells them to be prepared. They wake up because someone says, here's what actually happened to me, and here's what I wish I had known. And if this kind of practical preparedness is helpful to you, make sure you subscribe because this is what we do here. We talk about food, water, power outages, emergency supplies, pantry meals, and real life ways to make your home more stable before something happens. We're not preparing because we're scared. We're preparing because we love our families and we want options. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me an emergency light emoji in the comments. And I had mentioned earlier that I recorded a video about creating a 14-day meal plan instead of just storing random food. This is that video right here, and the free printable is in the description below the video. I'm Jara with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.